And we're not breaking yours now.
Okay, now we go.
Actually, I think I'll start. I need to be a spot. I'll give you a 1 minute remaining. That we want 30 seconds.
Can we get like you good Bryce? Let's go. Can we get what we like is a 1 minute warning, and then we reach for 4 minutes. 30 second grace period.
Especially in the later rounds.
I'll give it a few minutes. How dare you?
I guess you also can just start whenever they want.
The things we hear about in college. Everyone wants winners and losers now.
The vote is usually on who took the debate, who took the motion, rather than what perspective.
Yes, that's right.
We don't make that clear.
Yes. Getting the go ahead. tough.
It's not dangerous, we won't call you out.
Economics is the new religion. This is a quote that somebody said somewhere that I don't know where it is, but it stuck with me. And I think the point is that there's a lot of blood and gore and deep passion that sits behind the topic of economics, and that's what drove this. Thanks for coming, everyone. The collaboration SIG is happy to host and blow our budget on the final, I think, our final event. So there'll be lots of beers, which we'll get to. Yeah, we're excited because we have some of the economic powerhouses of our class here today to help enlighten and entertain us for today. So in terms of those two things, enlighten, so the day will be, the opening will start off with a little educational video that Bryce and Sean will help explain to us, and that'll be kind of about 20 minutes. Then we will break for drinks. I know some people stole some, even though they shouldn't have. Bayou is our bodyguard now. He's protecting us. He's sneaking behind back to. So we'll do that. So 20 minutes of this let's watch the video, 20 minutes of just kind of enlightening us about sort of the broad theories of economics. I know some of us here today know pretty much nothing about economics. Other people are I think there's a lot of BAs of economics in our class, but there's experts. So we have a broad range. So this is to kind of get people up to speed about some of the major philosophies and some of the nuances behind them. And then we'll go for beers, and then after that we'll have the big debate. And the debate is going to be based off of a nuanced Oxford rules. So we've taken the Oxford Union rules and just kind of slightly changed them. So what's going to happen is, in the same way as Oxford, each person will speak. We'll give them each 4 minutes to speak. Then we'll allow the audience to come and say their piece. Each audience member has 2 minutes to make their opinion heard, and if they don't, I'll very much make sure they don't. They have to sit down. And so we'll have about 15 minutes for audience to speak and say their opinions. Then we're going to have a final rebuttal by the team at the end, which is how we're modifying it, to give them a final chance. There's seats at the front, so come and sit. Fill up the spots at the front. In terms of, if you've never been to an Oxford Union debate, then basically if you have a point of information that you think needs to be mentioned during the debate, you are allowed to stand up and say point of information. It is up to the debater to acknowledge and say yes or no, and sit down. You can do whatever you want to make them sit down. The same as a point of order. So information that might be lacking. Order is actually a point you want to make, but it's up to the debater to acknowledge or dismiss you. I think that's about it. What we'll do at the very beginning is we want to take an initial poll of the audience of where you sit on the motion. So today's motion is, this House believes that government should do more to end this depression. The proponents of this is here on my left, the men with the beautiful mustaches, and people against this are on the left. And so right now we'll take a poll on what people sit on this motion. However, at the end, we would like people to vote based off of the merit of the debate, as opposed to where you stand on the issue, because we want to get a sense of where people felt the winners of the debate were. So I guess right now we'll get hands up. So who here is a proponent? Proponent is the right word? I don't even know. Yes?
Proponent and opponent.
Proponent and opponent. So initial. Opponent. Opponent. Number of people who believe this House believes that the government should do more to end this depression. Hands up. Oh, wow.
This is why we're doing that.
It's more fun than knowing it.
It's good to see you like that.
We see seven steps up, 7,
And all those against the motion that this House believes that the government should do more to end this depression.
I don't think we get to vote. Thank you so much.
18.
Might need for some.
Back to the ridge. Not bad. Oh, and the final point, very good point. Heckling is allowed if it is clever, witty, and well thought.
The audience needs to make their voices heard.
Lots of audience participation. Final thing is the camera is filming at all times, So if you're going to be doing slurs that you think might harm your future political careers, at your table, maybe not in front of the camera. So I think that's about it. Thanks everyone for coming, and we will start with the video.
I don't think that was it.
That was it. Some ready guys.
Lord Keynes, welcome, sir. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
Your agenda.
That won't be necessary. I am the agenda. Tell them I've arrived.
And then tell them I've arrived.
And your name is...
Hayek. F.A. Hayek. With an H.
Freddie. Hey, listen, I'll be at the Fed.
20 minutes.
Lobby. John Maynard Keynes.
F.A. Hayek.
Yeah, we're opposed.
We oppose each other philosophically.
In the same studio.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and the reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
It's the animal spirits. John Maynard Keynes wrote the book on modern macro. The man you need when the economy's all trampled. Depression, recession, now your question's in session. Have a seat and I'll school you with one simple lesson. 1929, the big crash. We didn't bounce back, economy's in the trash. Persistent unemployment, the result of sticky wages. Waiting for recovery, that's outrageous. I had a real plan, any fool can understand. The advice real simple, who's aggregate demand? C-I-E, altogether gets to Y. Keep that total low and watch the economy fly.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and the reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
It's the animal spirit. You see, it's all about spending. Hear the register cha-ching. Circular flow, the dough is everything. So if that flow is getting low, doesn't matter the reason. We need more government spending. Now it's stimulus season, so forget about saving. Get it straight out of your head. Like I said, in the long run, we're all dead. Savings is destruction. That's the paradox of thrift. Don't keep money in your pocket or that growth will never live. Because business is driven by the animal spirits, the bull and the bear. And there's reasons to fear its effects on capital investment, income, and growth. That's why the state should double the gap with stimulus, both the monetary and the fiscal. They're equally correct. Public works, digging ditches, war has the same effect. Even a broken window is the glass man has to walk the multiplier, driving higher the economy's health. And if the central bank's interest rate policy takes a liquidity trap, and money stuck in the banks, deficits could be the cure you've been looking for. Let the spending soar, now that you know the score. My general theory's made quite an impression. Revolution, transform the econ profession. You know me, modesty, still I'm taking the bow. So say it loud and say it proud, we're all Keynesians now.
We've been going back and forth for a century.
I want to steer markets.
I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle and the reason to fear it.
I made my case straight, bitch, listen up.
I'll begin in broad strokes, just like my friend Keynes. His theory conceals the mechanics of change. That simple equation, too much aggregation, ignores human action and motivation. Keynes has a justification for bailouts, payoffs, black holes with machinations. To provide them with cover to sell us a free lunch. Then all that we're left with is debt and a bunch. If you're living high on that cheap credit hog, don't look for a cure from the hair of the dog. Real savings come first if you want to invest. The market coordinates time with interest. Your focus on spending is pushing more bread. In the long run, my friend, it's your theory that's dead. So sorry there, buddy, if that sounds like invective. Prepare to get schooled economics who invest in new projects like housing construction. The boom plants the seeds for its future destruction. The savings aren't real, consumption's up too, and the grasping for resources reveals there's too few. So the boom turns to bust as the interest rates rise. With the cost of production, price signals relies. The boom was a binge, that's a matter of fact. Now it's devalued capital that makes it the slack. Whether it's the late 20s or 2005, booming bad investment seems like they thrive. You must save to invest, don't use the printing press, or a bus will surely follow, an economy depressed. Your so-called stimulus will make things worse. Just more of the same, more incentives perverse. And that credit crunch ain't a liquidity trap. Just a broke banking system, I'm done, that's a wrap. We've been going back and forth for a century. I want to steer markets, I want them set free. There's a boom and bust cycle, and good reason to fear it. Play low interest rates.
It's the animal spirit. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist.
The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design.
Just realized we didn't need to show that because Bryce could have stood up and But for those of us who maybe understood the chorus, at least, or not even that, we're going to have Bryce and Sean come up and kind of try and help us frame some of the arguments that were in that video. I don't know who wants to go first.
Okay, so thank you for coming. We obviously are winning on the mustache front already. And actually, I'm kind of pleasantly surprised that we've got a bit of a lead already, so we'll hope to keep that. The first, what Bryce and I are going to do now is maybe take 10 minutes each and go through a bit more on the educational side, but not completely without debate, and then get into the actual. The other thing, just while I'm up here, a public service announcement. The alcohol in the back is only for the Keynesians, as per the video. So I just want everyone to be aware of that. It's free. It's free.
Does anyone know how to work? I've done this before. I push the off button to turn off. I'm pushing the on button. It's not turning on.
It takes a minute. It takes a minute. Push the on link for a second. It should come. It takes a while to warm up normally.
Sorry, Sean.
It's flashing. Does that mean?
I think it takes a minute.
It's probably a cooldown thing.
Sean, get over
Okay,
there.
the blue light just turned on.
6 minutes.
Squints. I don't know if that works for you, sure.
Is it going to come on eventually?
Yeah. See, it's just doing it's doing its thing now.
Yeah.
Leave it on. There we go. Okay, it's starting right now.
I just
Bryce, do you have a slide?
Huh?
Do you have a slide?
No.
Do you want to swap? Why don't you get
Oh yeah, I can go ahead.
It's just gonna start starting up right now.
No,
So.
it's fine. I can go ahead, sure. All right. Some minutes here. Okay, so Evan, Mike, and myself are here to represent the Austrian School of Economics, represented by the glorious F.A. Hayek. Yes. So called because the founders of the School of Economics are primarily from Austria. There they are. All right. But before we get started, I just wanted to point out, we're doing Keynes versus Hayek here, but there are other schools of thought in economics. This isn't a two-sided debate. There's monetarism, neoclassicism, umpteen others. These are just kind of the extreme examples to either side, and so it makes for more fun debate. Not to mention, he has gear with Hayek's face on it. So what is Austrian economics? You're going to hear from Sean in a few minutes a lovely theory of an economy which acts according to a clean circular flow, where you can describe the entire economy with a simple, elegant equation. Income is consumption plus government spending plus investment, plus if you're looking at just an economy next. It's a beautiful, elegant accounting system for an economy. But as Tomo taught us, accounting doesn't just report reality, it can create it. If the Keynesians are right, then it's incredibly obvious. All you have to do to create growth is increase the G. The government spending and income naturally increases. It's an equation. Sean will no doubt make clear that there are some subtleties to this, but ultimately this is the core of Keynesian doctrine, that you can aggregate everything in the economy up to these simple buckets. But the economy isn't aggregate. It isn't a big pot of homogeneous consumption, homogeneous investment, or identical people. The economy is us. Every person, their individual choices, their individual projects. Every factory, office, home, and business is different from the next. The implication of this is that all growth isn't equal. Real growth isn't just an increase in the Y in an equation. It's a production of what people demand. It's production of things which improve your standard of living. It's a factory that makes a car. A new production method that lowers costs at Walmart or Tesco. It's research into miniaturizing the components of a computer to produce the first iPhone. When a portion of our collective wealth, our income, is allocated to expanding production of things which people want, we're all better off, and real growth occurs. The only way for market participants to know what people want and what projects are worth investing in is prices. Prices are key, according to Austrian economics. Prices reflect the state of demand and supply, not only now, but into the future, for every good in every industry. If people want more of something, its price rises. More money flows to its producers, and they have the capacity to expand production. New entrants are enticed to move into that market and expand production, such that supply meets that increased demand. If that demand is anticipated in advance, speculators step in and buy the good ahead of that demand, pushing prices up, so that producers get the message and expand production so that once that new demand comes about, that production is online to meet it. If there's a supply shock, such as an earthquake, which destroys production facilities, rising prices create incentives for businesses to invest in rebuilding that productive infrastructure. And finally, when people don't want anything anymore, whether it's coal mining in Britain or blacksmithery, which is of course so important in our modern economy, the firms exit or go out of business as prices fall and their profitability declines. The most important price is the interest rate. The reason for this is that money isn't wealth, it's a claim to wealth. Wealth is the product of productive labor, the output of factories and offices. It's TVs and haircuts and x-rays and MBA programs. When we sell something we have produced, we get money, which is a claim on the equivalent value of wealth produced by someone else. It's a claim on someone else's production. We can choose to use that claim to consume, buying food, TVs, cars, homes, or we can save it, in which case that wealth is available to be loaned to others or invested in others to use for productive investment, financing new factories, new research, business students, so that we all might be wealthier in the future. And with the understanding that in exchange, we will be given more wealth to compensate us for the delay in our consumption. The interest rate is the price of this savings. It reflects both how much people want to consume versus save, and the amount of productive investment opportunities that exist. The interest rate in a free market is the price at which all projects which are justified at that rate receive funding, and all of the necessary wealth to fund those projects is saved rather than consumed. And this is where the Austrian conception of the business cycle, perhaps the most important theory, comes from. Let's go through a typical business cycle in which you have an active central bank, like the Fed, from before the boom gets started. The central bank prints money to push interest rates down below the natural rate. Those of you who took macroeconomics will realize that this printing of money will lead to future inflation, But it doesn't happen immediately. In the short run, people think that each of these new dollars is a claim on the same amount of wealth that each dollar before the printing happened was a claim on. And so more projects are undertaken than is justified by the actual amount of savings. And because interest rates fall, less wealth is actually saved regardless. Labor, money, and resources go into these projects. This creates the look and feel of a boom. Now, as these businesses and projects try to access the resources, the wealth they thought they had a claim to, they find that the demand for this wealth is greater than the supply, and prices start to rise. This higher cost of production means that many of these projects can't actually be justified with the wealth they genuinely have a claim to, and they start to fail, selling off their assets at depressed prices. This misused wealth is then bought up by the projects that were actually justified in the first place, but not all of them. All that labor that went into, but not all of them, because some wealth was destroyed. All of the labor that went to those projects is lost. Some of the resources aren't recoverable. If you tear down a house, you can't reuse all the bricks. Projects that would have been justified in a free market failed too, as too little was saved because of depressed interest rates. The growth from the boom was really just a bubble. And in the end, we have less real growth in production than would have happened in a free market, because to invest, you must save. And the only way to make these two things equal out is with market interest rates. A similar story could be told with fiscal stimulus, where, for example, a first-time homebuyer tax credit leads to too much wealth flowing into housing construction, which at the end isn't justified by actual demand and supply, and so just creates a bubble. The point of all this is that in the Austrian view, government intervention in the economy does not create growth. It creates bubbles, which are destructive of growth. That when it tries to smooth out the business cycle, it's simply trying to shellac over the fallout from the last bubble by creating a bigger one, or a new one in a new sector. When malinvestments are made, they must be allowed to fail so that the capital, the wealth, tied up in those malinvestments can be redistributed to more productive ventures. The crux of the matter is that all government interventions into the economy affect prices. And without market prices, how can you plan? When home prices rise, should a builder invest in more production to meet growing demand? Or is it just a bubble, in which case you'll lose your shirt for the extra investment? Unless it's a bubble that the government will pump more money into when it looks to fail, or maybe you can just get a bailout. The point is that this provides the basis for my final point. That not only do government interventions affect prices and therefore cause malinvestments, which must eventually correct through busts, but they create uncertainty, which makes it harder for businesses and entrepreneurs to plan and make the kind of long-term investments needed to enable real and sustainable growth. That's the general Austrian perspective on government interventions, and I hope it was informative. There we go.
Okay, I'm going to just touch a few points here and, that I've stole from the video. Basically, give a bit of background on Keynes, going to, I think Bryce did a very good job summing up the Austrian side. I'm going to make a few contributions to, I think, how they relate, but I think he also touched on a good point from the beginning, which is Keynes and Hayek are kind of two ends of a spectrum here. And so for the points of this debate, we're going to try and elucidate the differences, but there's a big range in between. So first of all, just a little bit about Keynes. I won't get into all of this, but basically, for those of you who don't know him, famous economist from that other school, not Oxbridge. But basically, the central economic problem of his era was the crash in 1929 and the Great Depression. And despite the, so you're looking at unemployment of 25%, persisting for years, and despite all the kind of classical economic models of the time, economies were not returning back to pre-crash levels. Many worried about with communist revolutions occurring in countries across the world. Many worried about the fate of capitalism and freedom at that very time. And Keynes, in response, he publishes his general theorem in 1936, and his core insight is that in times of slumps, in times of economic depression and recession, that's when the economy deviates from our kind of classical models of supply and demand. And so his insight was economy can get stuck, and that either through fiscal or monetary policy can help in these situations. The initial reaction actually was very critical, but it gradually expanded upon and basically became mainstream after World War II. So getting into the framework, I don't want to make this a macroeconomics class, but basically it's when, as kind of Bryce was talking about, he was talking about the situation of individual actors making decisions based on prices, based on the economy, and the macroeconomy reacting accordingly. Keynes's insight was that there are situations where the individual rational decisions of everybody in the economy, everyone doing what makes sense based on the information available, leads to inefficient macroeconomic outcomes. And so the kind of classic example is, there's a shock to the economy. People get worried. They start saving. They start cutting their spending. That leads to demand. And so if one person does that, it makes sense. If everyone in the economy does that, suddenly demand for goods start to fall. Suddenly, the output on the production side starts to fall, and suddenly the output is another person's income begins to fall, and people's incomes, they start trying to save to protect their incomes, are actually worse off than when they started. So his point is that in the short run, economies do not efficiently readjust to negative shocks. There's issues like prices and wages do not adjust immediately. Unemployment will persist longer than necessary, that classical models would predict. And what I described was what you may have heard as the paradox of thrift. Everyone trying to save actually can reduce the aggregate savings in the economy. And his insight was that the slump can be reversed by the government temporarily playing an active role, increasing the amount of money or directly spending funds to offset consumer spending. And just so we know what we're talking about here, when we're talking about cutting taxes, stimulate the economy, when we talk about Alan Greenspan or Ben Bernanke cutting the interest rate, this is within a Keynesian framework. It's evolved, it's been adapted over the time, but it's essentially the core components of what Keynes wrote 70, 80 years ago. Just a few myths. I'll do this very quickly, but here's what you may think about Keynesianism just based on recent stuff. So Keynesianism means bigger government. Actually, what it means, Keynes really didn't have much of an opinion. He may have had a personal opinion on whether the government should socialize health care or not, or whether it should provide a social safety net. But actually, that's more of a political decision for voters. What Keynes was really focused on is what happens in the time of slump and what governments can do. And so it's kind of independent of how big or how small you believe government should be. Keynesianism, you may think debt load, solvency don't matter. Actually, Keynes would very much say that that matters. In fact, he would criticize Greece or the United States, for that matter, who in good times ran up huge fiscal deficits when they actually should have been worried about their debt. But he would just say, on the second point, austerity is always bad. He would say, just don't try and fix these things when the economy is really hurting. Don't try and do it when it's right at the bottom of a recession, because you're just going to make things worse. A few other points. I mean, Keynes was not incompatible with capitalism. He was a speculator himself, and he also, his point was, in certain circumstances, it may be worth more to stimulate the economy than the cost of not. So he was specifically worried about the bust, as I was saying. And again, it's not just about spending. There's monetary policy. There's lower taxes. There's many ways you can go about Keynesian frameworks. So just a few things just right now. This debate is about, what should the government do to end this recession? Point here, this is a UK real GDP. So if you look at this, 5 years ago, and then today, the size of the UK economy in real terms is 4% smaller than it was. So over 5 years, when you normally would expect 2% annual growth, we're looking at a real decline. So the economy is smaller than it was 5 years ago. This is something that hasn't been seen since the Depression in a country like the United Kingdom. United States, for example, here's kind of a broad measure of unemployment. So what we see here is, starting in 2008, the broadest measure of unemployment, these are people who've actually either unemployed or have given up on looking for a job because it's just so desperate right now, has more than doubled and has barely came down in the 2 years since the recession. This figure right here, this is the last one, I won't belabor this point, but this is actually how long someone waits when they get unemployed, how long it takes them to get a new job. So the average amount of time for the unemployed. And what you see here is, starting in 2008, it keeps on going up from about 20 weeks, so that means you lose your job 20 weeks before you get a new job, going up to 40 weeks. So almost double, almost 2/3 of the year before you, on average, you can expect to get a job in the United States. If you go back this chart all the way back to 1940 when they started doing these stats, there's not a year where it's above 22. So we're looking at almost double any historical figure since the 30s. These are just some recent press. Obviously the bailout, UK sinks into a double-digit recession. So what should we do? This is kind of part of the question. We'll get into this in much more detail, but just to hit the highlights. At the very least, let's not make it worse, right? I think that's the key point that we'd be saying here. I think there's still a bias towards inflation hawks in the central banks of, say, Britain and the euro, where, for example, they're worried about inflation. You haven't had inflation for 4 or 5 years. There's still a lot of room for easing. And then Europe is a particular case where the monetary union in Spain, Italy, and Greece is really causing a lot of contractions there. And really Germany has to figure out what role it wants to play, if it actually believes in union should be there or not. And finally, I think the other point is, this is not the time to kind of do a nice thought experiment and say, well, let's just let the banking system collapse and kind of see. Let's just hope that under that framework, everything will kind of work itself out, because it's a nice theory on paper, and I'm sure there'll be no consequences to that if it were to happen. Just a few other points about, because we were talking about Keynes and the Austrians here. Just putting a bit of context. So there is a lot of confusion recently about Keynes. About Austrians kind of associating themselves with, so if you don't like government, if you don't like a bigger government, if you don't think government should be regulating things, if you kind of are following the Tea Party movement in the States, then that means you're an Austrian. Actually there's a huge swath of mainstream economics, of which Austrians have basically been sidelined and on the fringe for about 80 years. So they've been doing a good job in the last couple of years to kind of associate themselves with the modern conservative movement, but I would say there's a big range between that. Milton Friedman's a good example. Very much committed to free markets, kind of the monetarist example of an economist and of a conservative economist, and he would not be someone who would be associated with Austrian economics. This is more of a helpful. Milton Friedman, who is one of the most conservative economists of his day, Nobel Prize winner, and has some pretty hard-hitting things to say about the Austrian business cycle. So with that, I think we're all Keynesians now. So I'll turn
Point of information. That'll be a point of information. F.A. Hayek also has a Nobel Prize in economics.
All right, so now we're going to break for drinks, let a little bit of the steam heat up. We'll kind of take maybe 5 minutes. So right now, just grab your drinks and start coming back.
I like drinks.
I'm just going to reframe that.